In this episode, we bring together many of the network security principles you have learned and apply them to a set of components that often sit directly at the boundary between your cloud environment and the outside world: load balancers, gateways, and proxies. These systems are designed to accept, distribute, or mediate traffic, which makes them powerful and convenient, but also inherently exposed. Beginners sometimes think of these components as purely operational tools that improve performance or simplify architecture, and while that is true, they are also security control points that deserve deliberate configuration. Because they are frequently internet-facing, they become high-value targets for scanning, probing, and exploitation. Reducing exposure from these components is not about removing them, since they are often necessary, but about applying strong defaults that limit risk before customization begins. When these boundary components are hardened by design, they serve as protective layers rather than accidental gateways to internal systems. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.Author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Load balancers are often the first public endpoint users interact with, and they play a dual role in both availability and security. At a high level, a load balancer accepts inbound traffic and distributes it to backend services, which are typically placed in private subnets. Beginners sometimes expose backend servers directly for convenience, but a properly configured load balancer allows you to centralize exposure and keep backend resources private. However, simply placing a load balancer in front of an application does not automatically make it secure. If its listener rules are too broad, if weak encryption settings are allowed, or if unnecessary ports are exposed, the load balancer itself becomes an expanded attack surface. Reducing exposure begins with limiting the protocols and ports it listens on to only what is required. It also involves ensuring that only expected sources can reach it and that it forwards traffic only to intended backend targets. Encryption settings on load balancers deserve particular attention because they often terminate transport layer security (TLS) sessions before forwarding traffic internally. Beginners sometimes assume that enabling encryption is sufficient, but the configuration details matter significantly. Allowing outdated protocol versions or weak cipher suites can reintroduce vulnerabilities even when encryption appears enabled. Strong defaults include enforcing modern protocol versions, disabling legacy options, and ensuring proper certificate validation. When encryption is terminated at the load balancer, you must also decide whether traffic to backend services should be re-encrypted or allowed in plaintext. Re-encryption strengthens confidentiality across internal segments and aligns with a defense-in-depth approach. Thoughtful configuration ensures that encryption policies remain consistent rather than opportunistic. Gateways, such as internet gateways, application gateways, and API gateways, introduce another set of exposure considerations because they often manage large volumes of traffic and complex routing logic. These components can route requests based on paths, host names, or other attributes, which adds flexibility but also increases configuration risk. Beginners sometimes focus on functionality and overlook how routing rules can inadvertently expose administrative endpoints or internal paths. Strong defaults include disabling unused routes, limiting administrative interfaces to trusted networks, and enforcing authentication requirements where appropriate. Gateways should not act as open conduits simply because they are designed to handle traffic. By narrowing their scope and applying clear policies, you reduce the chance of unintended exposure. Proxies serve as intermediaries between clients and servers, often providing caching, filtering, or additional inspection capabilities. Because they handle traffic at scale, misconfiguration can amplify risk across many services simultaneously. Beginners may view proxies primarily as performance enhancers, but they also shape how requests are forwarded and which headers or metadata are preserved. Exposure reduction involves ensuring that proxies do not forward unnecessary headers that reveal internal topology or sensitive details. It also means restricting which destinations proxies can reach, preventing them from becoming pathways for lateral movement or data exfiltration. When proxies are configured with minimal exposure and tight destination control, they reinforce segmentation rather than weakening it. Strong defaults extend beyond network rules to include identity and access management for these components. Administrative interfaces for load balancers, gateways, and proxies should be accessible only to authorized roles and preferably from restricted management networks. Beginners sometimes overlook management plane exposure while focusing on data plane traffic. If administrative access is broadly available, attackers who compromise credentials may manipulate routing or disable protections. Logging and monitoring administrative actions on these components provide additional assurance that changes are intentional. Protecting the management plane ensures that the boundary components themselves cannot be easily subverted. Rate limiting and traffic filtering are additional mechanisms that reduce exposure from boundary components. Rate limiting helps mitigate denial of service attempts by restricting the number of requests accepted within a defined time frame. Filtering based on known malicious patterns or geolocation criteria can further narrow exposure. Beginners may worry that such controls could block legitimate users, but thoughtful tuning balances security and usability. Implementing these controls at the boundary reduces strain on backend services and enhances resilience. When defaults include conservative rate thresholds and clear filtering policies, the system becomes more robust against common attacks. Segmentation reinforces exposure reduction by ensuring that even if a load balancer or gateway is compromised, backend systems remain insulated. Strong defaults dictate that backend resources accept traffic only from the boundary component, not directly from the internet or unrelated internal zones. Beginners should understand that reducing exposure at the boundary must be paired with isolation behind it. If backend services are reachable independently, the protective value of the boundary diminishes. By aligning network rules with intended traffic flows, you preserve containment even in adverse scenarios. Monitoring and alerting are essential to ensure that exposure remains controlled over time. Configuration drift can introduce new listeners, routes, or policy changes that expand reachability without immediate notice. Beginners should adopt the mindset that boundary components require periodic review and validation. Logs capturing inbound traffic patterns, rejected connections, and administrative changes help identify anomalies early. When deviations are detected quickly, corrective action prevents long-term exposure. Another often overlooked aspect is ensuring that boundary components do not leak internal information through error messages or headers. Misconfigured proxies or gateways may reveal server names, software versions, or internal addresses in responses. Beginners sometimes consider such details harmless, but attackers use them to map environments and target specific vulnerabilities. Strong defaults include sanitizing responses and minimizing disclosure of internal metadata. Reducing information leakage strengthens overall defense posture. Consistency across regions and accounts is critical when deploying boundary components in distributed cloud environments. If one region enforces strict defaults while another remains permissive, attackers will gravitate toward the weaker configuration. Standardizing templates and policies ensures uniform protection regardless of location. Beginners benefit from centralized policy enforcement that maintains alignment across deployments. Consistency reduces the likelihood of overlooked exposure. Reducing exposure from load balancers, gateways, and proxies with strong defaults ultimately means treating these components as security assets rather than mere traffic directors. By limiting listeners and routes, enforcing modern encryption settings, isolating backend services, protecting administrative access, and monitoring continuously, you transform boundary components into robust defensive layers. For new learners, the essential lesson is that exposure is not only about which services are public, but also about how public components are configured. Strong defaults reduce attack surface before customization begins and prevent accidental openness as environments grow. When boundary systems are hardened deliberately and reviewed regularly, your cloud network remains resilient, predictable, and significantly less vulnerable to exploitation.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.